That eye has seen something you haven't noticed yet. There is a lion 3 feet behind you, and you cannot hear it over your own heartbeat. So you grab the child beside you, and you back away 1 inch at a time, staring into the dark. You have not eaten in 2 days. Your hands will not stop shaking, and every animal at this waterhole came here for the same reason you did. Not a bad week. Just Tuesday. Your name doesn't matter right now, but the wide-eyed figure beside you, poking at a scratch in the mud, already distracted. That's Tusk, and he is going to get you both killed, or possibly save your life, depending on the next 10 seconds. Here is the question that keeps me up at night. How did creatures like you and Tusk survive a world that was actively, constantly, trying to kill you from every direction at once? Because the answer is not what you think. It isn't big brains. It isn't thumbs. It turns out terror, raw, chest-collapsing, cold sweat terror, is the actual engine behind every tool, every fire, every word our species ever spoke. Get that wrong, and you misread the whole story of what made us human. The baseline mortality stack. That's the name for every single threat lined up against one prehistoric person from the moment they were born. Infection, predators, bad winters, a wound that would be trivial today and fatal then. All of it stacked, all of it waiting. Here's why it matters. You tend to picture ancient humans as scrappy survivors, tough and weathered, built for hardship. You're probably imagining someone who made it. The ones who didn't leave no monuments. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University spent decades reading Neanderthal skeletons and teeth the way a mechanic reads a wrecked car, and what he found should stop you cold. Neanderthal life expectancy at birth sat somewhere around 30 to 35 years. Not 35 as a ceiling, 35 as the rough middle of the range, and that number is dragged upward by the rare individual who somehow cleared 40. Most didn't get close. A bad tooth abscess, which you'd fix with a Tuesday afternoon appointment, was a slow execution. Consider what that actually means for any one person. You're born into a world where roughly half of all children die before their 5th birthday. We see this in skeletal assemblages from sites like Krapina in Croatia, where juvenile remains make up a striking proportion of the dead. To reach adulthood is already a statistical upset. To reach 30 is, by the numbers, a mild miracle. 35 makes you, in a very real sense, an elder. None of this is metaphor. What makes it stranger is that these were not fragile creatures. Neanderthal skeletons show healed fractures in numbers that suggest something close to rodeo clown levels of physical trauma. And they healed. They were resilient. The problem wasn't their bodies, it was the sheer volume of the stack. Remove one threat and another was already queued behind it, patient and indifferent. This is what individual life actually looked like. Not a journey, not an arc, but a series of bets, most of which the house won. Survival wasn't the background condition of human existence. It was the achievement, every single day, pulled off against odds that would make a reasonable person quit. So here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. If the baseline mortality stack made one person's life that statistically improbable, then the bodies that did survive must have been keeping a kind of running score of everything that almost killed them, which is exactly where the next chapter takes you into what the body keeps score of and how. So here is the obvious objection. Healed bones just means some individuals got lucky, right? Maybe a few tough outliers scraped through while everyone around them died. That's not a system, that's a coin flip. Except the evidence says otherwise, and it says so loudly, in 50,000-year-old bone. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, Ralph Solecki excavated a Neanderthal in 1957 who had survived a crushed eye socket, multiple healed skull fractures, and an arm so damaged it had likely withered and been partially amputated, possibly by the same people who kept him alive afterward. Modern trauma surgeons who've reviewed Shanidar once say the injury load alone should have been fatal. He was probably around 40, which in Neanderthal terms was genuinely old. Your immediate ancestor, in summary, was harder to kill than most things you own are hard to break. This is what paleoanthropologists call the trauma palimpsest, the body as a layered document, each healed fracture a sentence written over the last one. the whole skeleton eventually reading like a very grim autobiography. Mark Skinner at Simon Fraser University documented healed fractures in Neanderthal skeletal samples at rates comparable to modern professional rodeo riders. Rodeo riders, people whose career is essentially a formal agreement with gravity that gravity will win eventually. That comparison is not a compliment exactly. It is a precise description of what large animal hunting at close range actually costs a body. Tusk, watching a Neanderthal reset his own dislocated shoulder against a rock face, knew, hated, noted. Entry 400 and something on the tally. Here is what the trauma palimpsest actually means. Resilience is not a modern invention, not a wellness concept, not something you develop at a retreat in the mountains. The capacity to absorb catastrophic damage and continue is written into the oldest anatomy we can read. The bones are the record, and the record is full. Every healed fracture in Shanidar, one is proof of a community decision. Someone chose to feed and carry and protect a man who could not contribute his full share, probably for years. That is not luck. That is a system operating under pressure, returning a result. So the skeptic's objection, lucky individuals, no pattern, collapses under a simple question. How many lucky individuals make a pattern? At rodeo rider rates across multiple sites, across tens of thousands of years, luck has left the building. Surviving injury is one thing, but what about the living landscape itself, full of things actively designed by evolution to eat you, which is exactly what awaits you in the predator tax. But here's what you might not have clocked yet. The injuries and chaos from the last chapter weren't the strange part. The strange part is what was causing them. You probably carry a quiet assumption that humans, even early, spearless, fire-struggling humans, were at least running the show locally. Top of the food chain, inconvenienced by nature, but not, eaten by it. That assumption has a problem. It's wrong. For most of human prehistory, you were prey, not metaphorically. Literally on the menu, assessed by large animals the way a sandwich assesses nothing, because sandwiches don't do the assessing. Your default position in the ecosystem was somewhere between snack and occasional meal, and the fossil record is extremely clear about this in ways that should make you sit down. Take the cave sites at Zhoukoudian, China, where bones of Homo erectus dating to around 500,000 years ago carry carnivore tooth marks. Not tool marks, tooth marks, meaning something large processed your ancestors the way your ancestors processed deer. Tusk looked at this data, paused and filed it under. Knew, hated, noted. Go back further. The Narioka Tome boy, skeleton KNM-WT15000, discovered in 1984 by Kamoya Kimeu near Lake Turkana, puts Homo erectus at 1.6 million years ago, sharing riverbank real estate with lions, leopards, and crocodiles, not neighboring them distantly. Sharing. The way you share a bus with someone eating a very loud sandwich, except the sandwich is you. And the crocodiles were not the modest modern kind. Crocodilus thorbjarnarsoni, documented by Matthew Milbauer and colleagues, reached roughly 7.5 meters, longer than a city bus, and is considered a likely predator of early hominins in East Africa during this period. 7.5 meters. Your entire family reunion fits in its stomach with room for a disagreement about potato salad. Here's the status flip you weren't expecting. The creature that would eventually reshape every ecosystem on Earth spent millions of years as a mid-tier victim. The apex predator of the Holocene was, for most of its existence, being crunched by things that didn't give it a second thought. We didn't earn dominance. We survived long enough to steal it. That humility isn't philosophical. It's biological, written in tooth marks on your great-great-grandmother's femur. And giant predators were terrifying. But what about the killers so small you couldn't even see them coming, which is exactly the question that opens the invisible siege. Chronic parasite load. Your body right now is a neighborhood, and in the Pleistocene, that neighborhood had 15 to 20 uninvited tenants, all of them eating your lunch from the inside. A 2016 study by Linda Holt and Mark Donoghue estimated that parasite disease load in prehistoric populations ran substantially higher than in modern hunter-gatherers, and modern hunter-gatherers already average 15 to 20 helminth species simultaneously. That's not a bad year. That's Tuesday. You are not fighting one worm. You are managing a small apartment complex of worms, flukes, and protozoa, none of whom pay rent and all of whom are remodeling. This wasn't occasional bad luck the way stepping on a hornet's nest the size of a fist is bad luck. It was the permanent baseline condition of being alive and human. Your immune system never got a day off, not a single one, because the siege never lifted. Tusk, for the record, would have catalogued this threat exactly as he catalogued the cave bear and the flash flood. Knew, hated, noted, filed somewhere between river with teeth and everything else trying to kill me. The antiquity of this burden goes deep. Adauto Araujo and colleagues at Fiocruz in Brazil analyzed 2,800-year-old mummies from South America and found direct evidence of Chagas disease alongside intestinal parasites, confirming that vector-borne disease was not a later agricultural invention. It was already ancient, already layered into human bodies, already doing its quiet, catastrophic work long before anyone built a city or a granary to blame. What this means is not simply that prehistoric life was unpleasant, though it was, spectacularly. It means that the human immune system, one of the most complex biological structures ever documented, capable of recognizing and responding to millions of distinct molecular threats, was not built for comfort. It was forged in a permanent war fought entirely inside you over hundreds of thousands of years, against enemies that had been co-evolving with your ancestors since before your ancestors were recognizably human. Every overreaction your immune system ever stages, every allergy, every autoimmune flare is arguably a soldier still looking for a fight that your modern body forgot to schedule. The war shaped the weapon, and the weapon outlasted the war. Internal parasites were a constant, but some individuals faced every hazard at once, layered on a single body, which is precisely what the next chapter, All Hazards, One Body, is going to make uncomfortably clear. You are Ötzi the Iceman, standing somewhere in the Italian-Austrian Alps around 3,300 BCE, and your body is quietly losing on 4 fronts simultaneously. This matters because we tend to imagine prehistoric suffering as a cue. First the infection, then the wound, then recovery, or not. Neat. Sequential. Wrong. What Ötzi's preserved corpse revealed when researchers finally got serious with it after his 1991 discovery is something physicians call the comorbidity horizon, the point at which multiple independent threats converge on one body at the same moment, each one serious enough on its own to ruin your decade. Ötzi had Borrelia burgdorferi, Lyme disease, threading through his system. He had intestinal parasites. His arteries were hardening. And somewhere on a ridge above the tree line, a person he probably knew drew a bow and put an arrow through him. Not one after another. All at once. Think of it as the universe submitting several invoices on the same morning, and every one of them is marked urgent. Tusk's assessment of this situation, delivered without blinking, noted. What makes the comorbidity horizon so clarifying is that Ötzi was not uniquely cursed. He was just uniquely preserved. Kennewick Man, found in Washington state and dated to around 9,000 years ago, carries a healed cascade spear point fused into his pelvis, which means he survived a stabbing, walked around for years afterward, and presumably had opinions about it. He healed. He kept going. The spear point became part of him, calcified and permanent, a souvenir of a bad afternoon that his skeleton is still carrying today. Both of these men illustrate the same grim arithmetic. The body is not a single battlefield waiting for one enemy, but a contested territory on every side at once, with no ceasefire negotiated between the worms and the arrowhead. Modern medicine separates your diagnoses into tidy folders. Prehistoric reality filed everything in one pile and set the pile on fire. New threat. Hate it. Noted. The tally kept growing, and the tally had no ceiling. This is what it means to be human at the biological floor. Not a creature that faces dangers one at a time, but one that accumulates them, survives some, and occasionally gets archived in a glacier as evidence. The suffering was never sequential. It was simultaneous, layered, and shared. which raises the obvious question of what happened when violence scaled up from one ruined body to whole communities, which is exactly where we're going next, into when neighbors killed. So here's the uncomfortable question you're already forming. Wasn't prehistoric life actually peaceful? A kind of wandering Eden before cities taught us greed? Lawrence Keeley looked at the bones and respectfully disagrees. In his 1996 book, War Before Civilization, Keeley calculated that death rates from warfare in prehistoric skeletal samples ranged from 15 to 60% in some populations, numbers that make the world wars look, statistically, like a bad weekend. Yes, those figures are contested. Some anthropologists argue Keeley's skeletal samples overrepresent cultures already known for violence, the way a study of hospital patients overrepresents illness. That's a fair push, but even the lower end of his range, adjusted generously downward, still bears the 20th century's proportional toll. The math does not get kinder the longer you look at it. This is the endemic conflict rate. Not a single catastrophic war, but the slow, grinding background rhythm of raids, ambushes, and border skirmishes that never fully stopped. Ötzi the Iceman, found in the Alps and dead for roughly 5,300 years, had an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder from behind. Someone who knew which direction he walked shot him in the back. That is not chaos. That is a decision. And here is where it gets genuinely strange. Violence and cooperation were not opposites pulling against each other. They co-evolved, each one sharpening the other like two stones grinding. Groups that coordinated well raided better and defended better. The bands that trusted each other most thoroughly were often the most dangerous to everyone outside them. Somewhere in your deep ancestors, solidarity and lethality grew up as siblings. Meanwhile, and your ancient great-great-grandmother deserves this acknowledged, Irvine Loudon's research in death in childbirth estimated pre-modern maternal mortality at roughly 1 to 2% per birth, which compounds across a lifetime of pregnancies into odds a sensible person would not accept. She accepted them anyway, repeatedly, while the endemic conflict rate hummed outside the shelter. Picture her looking up at both problems simultaneously and thinking, in the precise mental shorthand Tusk has been cataloging this whole time. Knew, hated, noted. The tally just keeps growing. What's remarkable is not that people died. It's that communities held together at all under this pressure. And not just held together, but built the habits of trust, reciprocity, and shared grief that would eventually become everything we call civilization. Violence between groups was devastating, but what happened when an invisible enemy struck not one group, but the entire species, which is exactly the question waiting for you in the pathogen leap. But here's what that whole picture of shared grief and hard-won trust leaves out. The moment your ancestors built something worth living in, the universe immediately tried to infect it. Around 10,000 years ago, the Neolithic transition, settling down, growing grain, penning animals, was the smartest move your ancestors had made since fire. It was also, depending on how you count the bodies, a catastrophic own goal. Domesticated cattle brought rinderpest cousins. Pigs shared influenza. Standing water in irrigation ditches bred malaria at scale. You swapped a life of scattered, hungry danger for a dense, well-fed petri dish, and the pathogens were delighted. To understand how badly the exposure shifted, think back to the Laetoli footprint trails in Tanzania. Pressed into wet volcanic ash around 3.6 million years ago and excavated by Mary Leakey between 1976 and 1978. Those prints show your early relatives walking the same ground as large carnivores, threat and prey sharing the same mud. That danger was at least visible. You could hear it breathe. What the Neolithic dropped into your villages was invisible, replicating, and patient in a way no cave bear ever managed to be. Knew, hated, noted. The genomic record is now specific enough to name names. Eski Villerslev's Copenhagen group, working with early Bronze Age skeletal DNA, identified novel epidemic-associated strains of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind plague, embedded in genomes from communities already reeling from the Neolithic transition, published in 2018. These weren't isolated sick individuals. The strains appear across a wide geographic band, suggesting the disease was moving through populations the way rumors move through a village, fast and not stopping for anyone's convenience. Tusk, watching a farmer haul grain into a shared storehouse while Yersinia pestis rides a flea on a rat at his heel, registers this as entirely on-brand. What it means is uncomfortable and important. Every solution your species invents reshapes the threat landscape it lives inside. There is no clean win, only a renegotiated set of dangers. Farming fed millions. It also created the epidemiological density that made millions killable at once. Progress and peril aren't opposites, they're the same hand, and one always knows what the other is doing. The plague strains Willerslev's team found were regional, Bronze Age, terrible, but bounded by how far a sick person could walk. Which raises the obvious next question, the one that takes everything catastrophic you've just learned and scales it past any single civilization's borders. What does it look like when the entire planet tries to kill everyone at once? Which is exactly where Planet as Assassin picks up. Geophysical extinction pressure. That's when the ground itself is the threat. Not a rival group, not a bad winter, but the actual crust of the Earth deciding, with complete indifference, to reset the population counter. Here's why that matters more than almost anything else in this story. Around 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano beneath what is now Sumatra erupted at a scale. Geologists rate VEI 8, the top of the scale, the kind of event that happens maybe once every 100,000 years and leaves a caldera you can see from orbit. The Toba eruption punched somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere, dimming the sun for years and cooling the planet by several degrees. Some researchers think it may have squeezed every surviving human on Earth into a population smaller than the current student body at a mid-sized American high school. Fewer than 10,000 breeding adults, possibly far fewer. The honest caveat, the causal link between Toba and a human bottleneck is genuinely disputed. The genetic signal is real, but whether Toba caused it remains an open fight among paleoanthropologists. Still, the timing sits there, blinking at you. Meanwhile, the survivors who eventually spread into the Americas were walking into a continent that had its own opinions about them. At Rancho La Brea in present-day Los Angeles, the tar pits preserve a perfect, horrible record of Smilodon fatalis, a predator weighing up to 280 kilograms, built like a mussel with opinions, hunting large prey repeatedly in the same locations where early humans were also operating. New continent. New apex predator. Noted. What you're watching, across all of this, is a planet that does not factor you into its plans. The Earth runs volcanic cycles, orbital wobbles, and megafauna population dynamics on schedules measured in tens of thousands of years, and your species is a very recent, very small variable in that equation. Every human alive today descends from a group that survived at least one near-deletion event, possibly several, through a combination of behavioral flexibility, dumb luck, and the fact that some of them were apparently standing in exactly the right valley when the ash fell. That is not a heroic origin story. It is a statistical near miss dressed up as a species, which is what makes the next piece of evidence so striking. If the planet nearly wiped us out once, what does the genomic record say about just how close to zero we actually came, which is the question that drives everything in the ember that held? You are standing inside a building that holds every ancestor you have ever had. Not a city block, not a neighborhood, one building. And it's not even a big one. That's not a metaphor. Around 900,000 years ago, a 2023 genomic study by Wang Jiehu and colleagues, published in Science, found that the ancestral population of modern humans may have collapsed to as few as 1,280 breeding individuals. Tusk's reaction to that number is just a long, slow blink. Somewhere in Africa, the entire future of your lineage fit inside a single apartment complex, and none of them knew it. To understand why this matters, you have to feel the arithmetic. Most species need tens of thousands of breeding individuals to keep their genetic options open. We had 1,200, maybe fewer, for what the study estimates was roughly 100,000 years. That's not a bottleneck. That's a keyhole. Every one of those individuals was carrying the entire weight of human possibility on their back, completely unaware, probably busy worrying about something with claws. Knew, hated, noted. The genomic evidence Hugh's team pulled this from isn't a single bone or a single site. It's the shape of variation written into living human DNA, a method called fit-col that reads ancient population size the way a doctor reads a scar. The signal is so stark that the researchers themselves called it a near-extinction event. Roughly 98.7% of the ancestral human population was gone. Whatever caused it, prolonged climate disruption is the leading candidate, though no one can say for certain. The survivors didn't just endure it. They held together through it, which is the part that should stop you cold. Survival at that scale isn't individual. It can't be. 1,200 people isn't a lone genius with a sharp rock. It's a network, a web of shared fire and shared food and shared knowledge passed hand to hand across generations that had every reason to fall apart. The fact that you exist is not proof that we were strong. It's proof that we were stubborn and cooperative and almost certainly very lucky. The ember held, barely, and everything that makes you human, language, memory, the particular way you recognize a face, descends from that absurd, flickering, improbable moment, which raises the next question. Once that group survived, what did they actually do with it? So here you are again, dusk, a waterhole, a child in your arms and your hands still shaking. The lion is real. The hunger is real. And yet the thing that nearly ended your line 10,000 times over was not the lion at all. It was the stranger on the other side of the water. Every wall, every signal fire, every alliance sealed by a shared meal was an answer to that one unbearable fact. That is what survival meant. Not outrunning the dark, but choosing again and again who you would face it with. The group that held together outlasted the one that didn't. And you are the direct result of every one of those choices landing right. So the child in your arms made it. You made it. And the question that should keep you up tonight is, what exactly are you building for the stranger on the other side of the water now?